So what I do today is try to, I think it's probably more productively to look at a real issue on the ground. And when we look at the Tianxia minimalist morality issues. So let me put my key argument first. So currently the return of great power rivalry between United States and China has also resulted in polarization of human rights between China and Washington. I think such a polarization is unproductive and unnecessary. And I think this the ideological-based kind of contestation it should not be that. We should develop a better world order. We needed to find a normative convergency. That is how America and China can work together towards a certain minimalist thinking about rights, human rights. So this requires a minimalist morality and a critical consideration of Chinese promotion of the rights to development. I think Tianxia offers a new interpretation of the transformative nature of Chinese human rights effort in United Nations Human Rights Council. The rights to development, as well together with economic social rights, might be a candidate for a minimalist norm for a planetary order. And Washington's simplistic dismissal of Beijing's development approach is detrimental, not only to American interests, but also to the cause of human rights itself. So those are my key arguments. So let's look at this. I selected the case study of China's promotion of rights to development in UN Human Rights Council. So let's start with a puzzle. It's a really interesting, this puzzle comes from this figure. So see, in 2018, when China tabled promotion mutually beneficial cooperation in the field of human rights in UN Human Rights Council, China gained 28 council members support. That's the complete majority of the UN Human Rights Council members. And only one council member, that is the United States of America, objected. Then the 17 abstained. So this is a really puzzle issue. How America, a world leaders in promote human rights, when come to the 2019, become the isolate. It's kind of outlet when come to the issue on the Chinese proposals on the mutually beneficial cooperation in the field of human rights. So this is a puzzle. I think that the American public people, critic might be dismissed this puzzle because they said, oh, those 28 support, the China just spend money, buy those 28 vote. So that's the kind of often comments we heard. And but if we look at there's the other case. In the 2017, China gained support 30. Then we look at another case in the 2019, another Chinese third resolution. China gained 30. Each time, because they changed the council membership, the changes. So it's hardly you can see that all those are kind of bought by the Chinese money. So then I think another another public view, a critical view, is that currently American dismiss the Chinese all those proposals because the Washington believe that China is a great violator of the human rights in this world. So how dare China kind of to talking about the human rights issue? So they deny the Chinese any legitimacy to discuss the human rights. So what do we say in this world, on the social media, on the dominate the newspapers? China, we always see China as Uyghur issues, Hong Kong human rights issues. So, but it's this kind of perception of Chinese human rights kind of widespread in this world, but then they overlook, ignore a key dramatic development that's Chinese promotion human rights in UN Human Rights Council, and the Chinese model of human rights gain a high level support in the Human Rights Council. As I just said, those support vote 28-30. At the same time, the West model, which emphasizes civic political rights, has faced a challenge question, whether its model is a universal supportive. So I think the Chinese advocacy of rights to development does reflect the interests of most developing countries, and today it really constitutes a dividing line, a deepening contestation between developing and developed countries. So I try to say that to deal with American objection to Chinese human rights effort, I think we need to understand, I try to offer alternative understandings. Those alternative understanding I call the Tianxia perspective, which can help us understand the Chinese effort. Zhao Dingyang, in his book, talking about Tianxia should be an analytical units beyond nation-state division, and the Chinese philosophy should be responsible for the whole world, not for China alone. So today, probably we can see the Chinese discourse, human rights discourse, is exactly doing what the Zhao Dingyang advocate more than 10 years ago. They try to be a global response for whole the world, rather than just simply defend the Chinese position. Tianxia offers a new interpretation of transformative nature of Chinese human rights effort. From the perspective of Tianxia, Chinese discourse on rights to development has become a new Tianxia doctrine. Use a universal language, very important. They use a universal language rather than Chinese, what are the Chinese characteristic or Chinese vernacular language. Taking a global responsibility and apply it to many developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America with a wide and high level of representation. The Chinese kind of discourse on human rights has also synthesized early advocacy of rights to development by South Africa and other countries, articulate the developmental experiences in East Asia, and advance it to a high level in UN Human Rights Council. So Chinese promotion of rights to development is not a Chinese doctrine that aim to defending Chinese human rights record. That is where I think Washington misunderstanding China, underestimate significance of Chinese promotion rights to development. Instead, Chinese promotion is for all the people of the world, particularly developing countries, to advance their rights, interests, and welfare. So Chinese new doctrine of rights to development seems to contain a set of minimum rights for all the people, China promotion of rights to development can be seen as a global effort in search of a minimalist rights for all the people. So I don't have time to go to the detail about Chinese position, Chinese views. So I would like to focus on this is one particular question: why Washington needed to change its policy? So currently, Washington since adopt whateverist position. So that is whatever the Beijing propose regarding human rights in UN Human Rights Council, Washington will oppose. As I said before, they think China does not have legitimate place, authority to raise such an issue. So I think such rejection is misleading. So I would put out a few arguments. The first argument is that we need there's a need to reconcile the development-based to human rights and the rights-based approach to human rights. So Americans always emphasize the rights-based to development. To development, you need most important, you need civic political rights. That is the best recipe for development. And then there's approach is the Chinese, South Africa, many other countries talking about the development-based approach to rights. Those approach sounds contradictory. I try to argue they can be reconciled. They are complementary. So I don't have time to go to detail. The second arguments are kind of minimalist approach to human rights. I think that this rights to development is rooted in human history from ancient to time. All the people under the heaven, if we're under this Tianxia doctrine, have a natural right to survival through the development. So historically, there were various forms of rights to development. For example, the colonizations and the slave system. All those were justified by one group's rights to survival and development. So clearly, if we're talking about rights to development, so there's a need to have a minimalist moral code to govern development activity. So this minimal morality regulating development must prohibit any new form of colonization and the slave system, and support economic and social rights at least. I think in this kind of context, China advocated the protection of economic and social rights to ensure a fair development, so as a sort of the minimalist morality. And we say this minimalist morality so far it requires maximum support, and so far Chinese promotion economic social rights gain the majority's council members' support. So I think that if we look at the just come to this minimalist approach to human rights, Marco was he yesterday talking about his sin approach. I think that together with Marco Ingenetiv, they both kind of develop a minimalist approach to human rights. This minimalist approach can be bridged the two competing approach mentioned above and offer a concrete way of reconciliation. So in the history of human rights developed in UK, the protection of negative freedom against torture and killing proceeded before protection civic and political rights. Poverty reduction, and by the way, the poverty reduction was best achieved in the 1960s in the United States. So is a part of human rights. The rights against hunger should be regarded as one minimal rights for all the people. Poverty reduction measures involve, for example, the rights to access food and shelter and the rights to employment. So in that context, the rights against poverty. So a government must declare that all the human beings are entitled to certain standard of living, and the state is obligated to ensure that all the human beings have that standard of living. So in this context, let's remember that China has been promote this poverty reduction in the Human Rights Council. Even in 2019, China shall push the agenda ahead. So think about this Tianxia doctrine. So China tried to think about that we should have international institutions to implement this initiative. So this Chinese promotion is become a Tianxia doctrine, not only talk but also institution policies. And of course, we know that Catherine and Nan clearly support this rights to development is a kind of measure of the respect of all other human rights. And I think that one of the reasons Washington failed to understand the Chinese position is to kind of fail to make a conceptual distinction between human rights abuse and the developmental approach to human rights. China has a legitimate reason to promote the development approach to human rights. So we need to separate those two clearly. The other issue, I think, is that there are a number of problems associated with the Washington approach. So Washington should recognize that its own approach has problems. And probably I won't go detail. We can clearly mention quite a lot of problems here. And I recognize that it's difficult for Washington to make a normative adjustment and to come on the table to develop this normative convergence. Because I think if we look at the historical record, despite the number of socialist countries in 1960 and 70, reached to about 39, Washington had been waged an ideological war against socialism on the world stage. So today, regardless of the number of developing countries that support the rights to develop, being about 51, so Washington has continued its resistance to the rights to development. But by the way, I think today we need a new updated version of Helsinki Accords. My paper, I made in my paper numerous argument, detailed argument, try to say why we need this Helsinki Accords and what Washington should do in order to achieve this new Helsinki Accords. So if we have a new version of Helsinki Accord, so we can kind of calm down currently geopolitical competition. I think the current geopolitical competition largely, also partially, is fueled by unnecessary polarization on this rights to development. Thank you. Welcome your comments, suggestions, criticisms.
Thank you, Professor He. Yes, any questions and comments?
Okay, I'm sympathetic to this idea that there doesn't have to be a conflict between the Chinese and American positions here. And one way of thinking about avoiding the conflict is to think very concretely about what a right to development is. I assume it's a right that belongs to me and you. We all have, it's an individual right. It belongs to all individuals. We all have a right to development, but apparently we don't have a right to argue about what development means. We don't have a right to argue about how to distribute the benefits and costs of development. And that seems very strange. If I say I have a right to free speech, it means I also have a right to argue about what free speech means and what the limits of free speech are and when libel laws come into effect and all of the questions that this right raises. Now, if a right of development is like a right to free speech, if it's a right, then the American position and the Chinese position come together. The right to development includes the right to free speech, to argue about development. And I just don't, the conflict seems to be a conflict of great power propaganda, but not a conflict that we have to recognize intellectually. I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you. I collect a few comments, then I reply once. Is that all right?
David?
Yes. Thank you. That was a very interesting paper, and I appreciate the framework in which you differentiate these two kinds of approaches to rights. And I'm also sympathetic to the idea that there can be some kind of accord or reconciliation between these approaches, given that, as Rawls puts it, the worth of liberties depends on our having certain goods and opportunities. And so there's a good reason to think that these different rights are connected. And you go on to point out that the Chinese record on civil and political rights could be faulted, but you distinguish, I think rightly, the viability of the approach, the development approach to rights. But I guess I want to raise this problem, which can be raised as a problem of trust on both sides. It's not as easy to separate out the violations of human rights on either side because it calls into question the sincerity of either side and the confidence that either side can have that the rights that are delayed on either approach are going to be forthcoming. So I guess that's the problem. And I want to stress that this could be raised for the American side as well. Even with regard to civil and political rights, it's always been an issue and an increasing issue now that what was really meant by equal rights is equal for some, but not for others. We've been so consistently acting that way that the world can call into question the sincerity of the American commitment to truly equal rights. But as I say, the same kind of doubt could be raised about the Chinese side. So I guess the question is, don't we have to address this question of trust before there can be real moves towards some kind of reconciliation? Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Wang Hui has questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank Baogang's presentation. I really enjoyed it a lot. The one simple question is that your suggestion for a new Helsinki Accord to be concluded. So what's the possible? Can you do some suggestions for that certain kind of the approach to promote that for these? Maybe it's not only for the Sino-American relations, but also the transformation of global situation that we look at a lot of things happening in the 20th century. For example, the Bandung Conference and some other events happened to change a little bit the whole atmosphere to promote the people together to rethink about the issues. The second is it's when I listen to your presentation, I cannot help to recall my experience 30 years ago in the Shanxi province, the poorest area in Qinling. And 2 years ago, after 30 years, I revisited there. I was so shocked by the great achievements and the developments in that region, because in that region, above the 1,500 meters, the villages, most of the people, due to the poverty and the lack of transportation, interfamily or all the close relatives marriage, that the result was more than 50% of population there in certain villages were mental ill. So that kind of phenomenon completely transformed. It's disappeared. So after the 30 years. So in that sense, the developments were together with the individual, certain kind of human rights, individual rights there, where we need to, based on that social condition, to redefine it, to develop the more comprehensive idea of the human rights. Thank you.
Hi, Baogang.
Okay, so thank you for those great comments and suggestions. So let me turn first to Professor Marco Walsh's comments. I come to the last point. This kind of you said the larger to do with a great power propaganda. I more than agree with you. In my paper, I said the current situation, polarization, unfortunately, it's really insult to human intelligence, because to human common sense. We already figured out those things, but geopolitics driven us to go to different direction. So I completely agree with you. So, but I do disagree with you on the key issue, your freedom interpretation of the rights to development. First, let's get to the factual right. That is the way China proposed the rights to develop in Human Rights Council. That involves the discussion. There are free discussion. All other country council members discuss. So then at the Chinese, the economic development stage, in various stage, how to develop involves so many discussion, open discussion and internal discussion. So freedom of discussion exists. So in both at home as well overseas at global forum. So that's we get these facts right. But I do disagree with you in the sense if we emphasize the rights to development, precondition for rights to development, we need to ensure the fully protection of the free speech. That's kind of your interpretation. Without talking about this, discuss with, if we don't have rights to discuss the rights to develop, so rights development does not exist. So I disagree with this logic. I think the Chinese, that's as well as many East Asian countries, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, historically they hold their certain period, they allow certain paternalistic notion of development. Enlightened leaders, they know how to develop. So they can make the right decision. So that's kind of, this return to the yesterday's talking about meritocracy. As long as leaders are meritocratic, and so they can put the development agenda, implement it. So we do need a certain level of freedom to discuss it, but it's a certain level, but not always talk. You always talk and nothing happens. So that's happen in the Western liberal society, isn't it? You always say everything, talk, and then nothing happens. So I think that, so we need also concern excessive, this libertarian obsessment. So we need to rights to discuss before you can have rights to discussion. So that I think it's serious problematic. I don't know what do you think? You can tell me later. I would like to have your response. And come back, Professor David Wang's question. I think that, so yours again said this, we need to address this trust issue first, then we can talk about reconciliation. I do agree, this is the trust issues that's so important. Currently, this polarization is largely due to this distrust. So Washington indeed have feel that Beijing is always misuse, violate human rights. How we can trust here talking about human rights? So indeed, I do agree with you. But at the same time, I think we can, through this work on the concrete project to address this trust here. See the issue of global poverty reduction. That's a wonderful project. Americans historically have a wonderful experience in 1960. China today have a great achievement. How those two countries work together, address the same issue. And that's so important. Rather than you enforce, you must have a democratic institution first. Then you address this poverty issue. So I think so I was thinking this pragmatic approach. And for Wang Hui's questions, I do think he's really good. How this Helsinki Accord is possible. In my paper, I recognize there's so many difficulties, but I think that it's possible. The possible is let's first start with intellectual level. Let's give a due recognition Chinese position. So here, remember, I think I should be careful. So as I already said, is a Tianxia doctrine. So we should do recognition to this new Tianxia doctrines of development, or new Tianxia's development policies. That is not only China advocated, more than 51 developed countries committed to this idea. So if we recognize that, I think that, and I think that currently it's maybe the Western side need to make a first move, give a more accommodate, normative accommodation to the developing country. That might make things possible. And I think that currently Wang Hui absolutely is right. The issue is not a Sino-American issue, it's a global issue. And then it's a really European countries also need to reconsider its opposition to rights to develop. But they are doing much better than United States. They sense in UN Human Rights Council, they sense flexible. They sometimes support the Chinese position. Then sometimes get along with the United States. And I do share with Qin Hui's last remark, this great transformation happening in China, like the Qinli. So I think that many developing countries precisely would like to see similar things happen at their countries. And I think that Washington, Beijing should work together, make those things happen.